Long ago, there lived an archer, whose home was near the water gate of Seoul. He was a man of great strength, known for his courage. The water gate was an opening, beneath the city wall, where the waters of the Grand Canal flowed out. Iron bars crossed it, to stop anyone passing through. One afternoon when this soldier was out walking, he came upon a great snake, making its way through the water gate. The snake's head had already passed between the bars, but its body was too large to follow, and there it was trapped. The soldier drew an arrow and shot the snake in the head. The arrow struck it in the head. The snake died. The archer pulled it free, pounded it into a pulp, and left it. Not long after, the man's wife gave birth to a son. From the beginning, the child was afraid of its father. When it saw him, it would cry and seem greatly frightened. As it grew, the hatred grew with it. The man became suspicious, and instead of loving his son, he grew to dislike him. One day, when the two of them were alone in the room, the officer lay down as if he were asleep, covering his face with his sleeve, but watching the boy all the time. The child glared at his father. Thinking him asleep, the boy picked up a knife and lunged at him. The man jumped up, grabbed the knife, and struck the boy dead. He pounded the body into a pulp and left. The mother, in tears, covered the little form with a quilt and prepared for its burial. Then the quilt began to move. She lifted it in alarm to see what had happened. The child was gone. In its place lay coiled a huge snake. The mother jumped back in fear, left the room, and did not enter again. When evening came, the husband returned and heard the story from his wife. He went in and looked. The body had turned into a huge snake. On its head was the scar from the arrow he had shot. He spoke to the snake, saying, "You and I were not enemies. I did wrong in shooting you as I did. But your plan to take revenge by becoming my son was a terrible thing. This proves my suspicions were right. You became my son in order to kill me, to kill your own father. Why then should I not kill you in return? If you attempt it again, it will end in your death. You have already had your revenge. You have returned to your true form. Let us drop the past and be done with it. What do you say?" He repeated his argument again and again, while the snake lowered its head and seemed to listen. Then he opened the door and said, "Now you may go as you please." The snake departed, heading straight for the water gate, and passed out between the bars. It was never seen again. Kim Soo-ik, the former magistrate of Kwelpart, lived inside the south gate of Seoul. When he was young, it was his habit to study Chinese daily until late at night. Once, when feeling hungry, he called for his wife to bring him something to eat. The wife replied, "We have nothing in the house except 7 or 8 chestnuts. Shall I roast these and bring them to you?" Kim replied, "Good. Bring them." The servants were asleep, and there was no one to answer the call, so the wife went to the kitchen, made a fire, and cooked them herself. Meanwhile, Kim waited for her to come. A short while later, she brought them in a basket, cooked and ready. Kim ate and enjoyed them greatly. Meanwhile, she sat before his desk and waited. Suddenly, the door opened, and another person entered. Kim looked up and there was the exact duplicate of his wife, with a basket in her hand and roasted chestnuts. As he looked at both of them beneath the light, the two women were perfect likenesses of each other. The two women stared at each other in alarm. They said, "What's this that's happened? Who are you?" Kim took the roasted chestnuts. He set them down. Then he took firm hold of each woman, the first one by the right hand and the second by the left, holding fast till the break of day. At last, the roosters crowed, and the east began to lighten. The woman whose right hand he held said, "Why do you hold me so? It hurts. Let me go." She shook and tugged, but Kim held all the tighter. After struggling a little longer, she fell to the floor and suddenly changed into a wild cat. Kim, in fear and surprise, let her go, and she made her escape through the door. In the year Pyong-sin, I found myself in trouble and was locked up. A military man named Choi Won-so, captain of the guard, was caught up in the same affair and imprisoned alongside me. We often met in prison and passed the time talking. One day the conversation turned to goblins. Captain Choi said, "When I was young, I encountered a hobgoblin which very nearly cost me my life. A strange case indeed." I asked him to tell me about it. He said, "I had no home in Seoul at the time, but I heard of a vacant house in Belttown, applied for it and got it. My father and the rest of the family took the inner rooms, while I lived in the front room. One night, late when I was half asleep, the door suddenly opened, and a woman came in and stood just before the lamp. I saw her clearly. I knew her. She was from the home of a scholar friend. I had seen her before, and had been greatly attracted by her beauty, but had never had the chance to meet her. Seeing her enter like this, I called out to her gladly, but she made no reply. I got up to take her hand, and she began walking backwards, so that my hand never reached her. I rushed toward her, but she moved faster, always just out of reach. We reached the gate, which she opened with a kick behind her, and I followed until she suddenly disappeared. I searched everywhere, not a trace of her. I thought she had simply hidden herself. I never imagined she could be anything other than what she seemed. The next night she came again, and stood before the lamp just as she had the night before. I got up and again tried to take hold of her. Again she walked backwards in the same strange way, until she passed out through the gate and disappeared. I was surprised and disappointed, but still did not think of her as a hobgoblin. A few days later I had gone to bed, when suddenly there was a sound of crackling paper from above the ceiling. A strange and unsettling sound in the dead of night. A moment later, a curtain dropped down, dividing the room in two. Then a great bed of burning coals descended right before me, and an immense heat filled the place. The room seemed to be on fire with no way out. I was terrified. I did not know what to do. At the first crow of the cock, the noise stopped. The curtain rose. The coals were gone. The room was clean with no trace of what had happened. The following night I had not yet gone to bed, when a great heavy-set man suddenly opened the door and came in. He wore a soldier's felt hat and a blue tunic like a government runner. He grabbed hold of me and tried to drag me out. I was young and strong then, and had no intention of giving in, so we fought. The moon was bright. The night was clear. But I could not overpower him. He pulled me out into the courtyard. He lifted me up and swung me round and round. Then he dragged me to the highest terrace and threw me down. I was badly stunned. He stood over me and held me down. Behind the house there was a garden surrounded by a wall. I looked, and within the wall stood a dozen or so figures dressed in military hats and coats. They kept shouting, "Don't hurt him! Don't hurt him!" The man who had attacked me said, "None of your business." But they kept on. "The man is a military gentleman. Do not hurt him." He said, "Even so, it's none of your business," and took me by both hands and flung me up into the air until I had gone halfway to heaven. Then in my fall, I went shooting past Gyeonggi province, past Chungcheong, and came down to earth in Chulla. As I flew through the air, I could see all the county towns of the 3 provinces below me as clearly as day. Again in Chulla, he threw me up once more. Again I shot up into the sky and came falling northward until I found myself at home, lying stunned beneath the veranda. Once more I heard the voices in the garden. "Don't hurt him, don't hurt him." And once more the man replied, "None of your business." He took me up again and flung me skyward, and back to Chulla, and back again. 2 or 3 times in all. Then one of the group came forward from the garden, took my attacker by the hand, and led him away. They gathered for a moment, laughing and talking, then scattered, and were gone. None of them were seen again. I lay motionless at the foot of the terrace until morning, when my father found me, had me carried inside and cared for until I came round. We left the haunted house that same day, and never went back. A nobleman of Seoul was holding a great celebration. Friends and relatives had gathered for a feast. The house was filled with guests. In front of the women's quarters, there suddenly appeared an uncombed, ugly-looking boy, about 15 years old. The host and guests, thinking him a servant, who had accompanied one of the guests, paid him little attention. But one of the women guests, seeing him in the inner quarters, sent a servant to tell him to leave. The boy, however, did not move, so the servant said to him, "Who are you anyway? And with whom did you come that you've come into the women's quarters, and refused to leave when asked?" The boy stood stock still, and said nothing. The guests looked at him in confusion, and began to ask one another who he was, and with whom he had come. Again they sent the servant to question him, but still there was no reply. The women then grew very angry, and ordered him to be put out. Several took hold of him, and tried to pull him, but he was like a fixed rock, fast in the earth, absolutely immovable. Frustrated, they went and told the men. The men, hearing this, sent several strong servants, who took hold all at once, but he did not budge. They asked, "Who are you anyway?" But he gave no reply. The crowd, then enraged, sent 10 strong men with ropes to bind him, but like a mountain he remained unmoving, so that they recognized that no man could move him. One guest said, "But he's human too. Why can't he be moved?" They then sent 5 or 6 giant fellows with clubs to smash him to pieces, and struck him with all their might. It looked as if he would be crushed like an eggshell, while the sound of their blows echoed like thunder. But just as before, he did not move, nor did he so much as blink. Then the crowd began to fear, saying, "This is not a man but a god." So they entered the courtyard one and all, and began to bow before him, joining their hands and pleading with him. They kept this up for a long time. At last the boy gave a sarcastic smile, turned round, went out of the gate, and disappeared. The guests, frightened out of their wits, called off the feast. From that day on, the people of that house were taken ill, including host and guests. Those who scolded him, those who tied him with ropes, those who pounded him, all died in a few days. Other guests too contracted typhus and other illnesses, and died also. It was commonly believed that the boy was the Tuuk spirit, though no one could say for certain. Before a clan disappears, calamity strikes it. Even if a great spirit came to the door during such a feast, if the guests had followed the advice of Confucius, be reverent and distant, instead of insulting him and making him more malignant than ever, they would have escaped. Still, devils and men were never meant to dwell together. Se-Pyong was a man of Seoul who lived to the age of over 90. When he was young, he loved archery and went as military attaché to the Ming capital in Peking. There he met a prophet who taught him the Wangzhongqiong, the sacred book of the Taoists, and thus he learned their laws and practiced their teachings. Se-Pyong was a military man who rose to the rank of minister in the days of King Chungjong. It seems that Yun learned the arts of magic from a passing stranger whom he met on his way to Peking in company with the envoy. At home, he lived in a separate house, quite apart from the other members of his family. He was a man so greatly feared that even his wife and children dared not approach him. What he did in secret, no one seemed to know. In winter, he was seen to put iron cleats under each arm and to change them frequently, and when they were put off, they seemed to be red hot. At the same time, there was a magician in Korea called Chon Uchi, who used to go about Seoul practicing his magic. So skillful was he that he could even simulate the form of the master of a house and go freely into the women's quarters. On this account, he was greatly feared and detested. Yun heard of him on more than one occasion and determined to rid the earth of him. Chon heard also of Yun and kept well away from him, never appearing in his presence. He used frequently to say, "I am a magician only. Yun is a god." On a certain day, Chon informed his wife that Yun would come that afternoon and try to kill him. "And so," said he, "I shall change my shape in order to escape his clutches. If anyone comes asking for me, just say that I am not at home." He then transformed himself into a beetle and crawled under a crock that stood overturned in the courtyard. When evening began to fall, a young woman came to Chon's house, a very beautiful woman too, and asked, "Is the master Chon at home?" The wife replied, "He has just gone out." The woman laughingly said, "Master Chon and I have been special friends for a long time, and I have an appointment with him today. Please say to him that I have come." Chon's wife, seeing a pretty woman come thus, and ask in such a familiar way for her husband, flew into a rage and said, "The rascal has evidently a second wife that he has never told me of. What he said just now is all false." So she went out in a fury, and with a club, smashed the crock. When the crock was broken, there was the beetle underneath it. Then the woman who had called suddenly changed into a bee and flew at and stung the beetle. Chon, changed back into his human form, fell over and died, and the bee flew away. Yun lived at his own house as usual, when suddenly he broke down one day in a fit of tears. The members of his family, in alarm, asked the reason. He replied, "My sister living in Chula province has just at this moment died." He then called his servants and had them prepare funeral supplies, saying, "They are poor where she lives, and so I must help them. He wrote a letter, and after sealing it, said to one of his attendants, "If you go just outside the gate, you will meet a man wearing a horsehair cap and a soldier's uniform. Call him in. He is standing there ready to be summoned." He was called in, and sure enough, he was a servant of the gods. He came in, and at once bowed deeply before Yun. Yun said, "My sister has just now died, in such a place in Chulla province. Take this letter and go at once. I shall expect you back tonight with the answer. The matter is of such great importance that if you do not bring it as I order, and within the time appointed, I shall have you punished." He replied, "I shall be in time, do not worry." Yun then gave him the letter and the bundle, and he went outside the main gateway and disappeared. Before dark, he returned with the answer. The letter read, "She died at such an hour today, and we did not know what to do when your letter came with the supplies, just as though we had seen each other. It was a wonder." The servant of the gods immediately went out and disappeared. The house of mourning is situated over 10 days' journey from Seoul, but he returned before sunset, in the space of 2 or 3 hours. The story ends there. The darkness does not. Among the long-lived creatures, Orientals say, are the tortoise, the deer, the crane, and the fox. These long-lived ones attain to special states of spiritual refinement. If trees exist through long ages, they become coal. If pine resin endures, it becomes amber. So the fox, if it lives long, while it never becomes an angel or spiritual being as a man does, takes on various metamorphoses and appears on earth in various forms. Yi Kwai was the son of a minister. He passed his examinations and held high office. When his father was governor of Pyongan province, Kwai was a little boy and accompanied him. The governor's first wife being dead, Kwai's stepmother was the mistress of the home. Once when His Excellency had gone out on an inspecting tour, the magistrate's residence was left vacant, and Kwai was there with her. In the rear garden of the official quarters was a pavilion called the Hill Pagoda that was connected by a narrow gateway with the public hall. Frequently, Kwai took one of the magistrate's boys with him and went there to study. And once at night, when it had grown late, and the boy who accompanied him had taken his departure, the door opened suddenly, and a young woman came in. Her clothes were neat and clean, and she was very pretty. Kwai looked carefully at her but did not recognize her. She was evidently a stranger, as there was no such person among the dancing girls of the magistrate's quarters. He remained looking at her, in doubt as to who she was, while she, on the other hand, took her place in the corner of the room and said nothing. "Who are you?" he asked. She merely laughed and made no reply. He called her. She came and knelt down before him, and he took her by the hand and patted her shoulder as though he welcomed her. The woman smiled and pretended to enjoy it. He concluded, however, that she was not a real woman, but a goblin of some kind, or perhaps a fox. What to do he knew not. Suddenly he decided on a plan, caught her, swung her onto his back, and rushed out through the gate into the magistrate's quarters, where he shouted at the top of his voice for his stepmother and the servants to come. It was midnight, and all were asleep. No one replied, and no one came. The woman then, being on his back, bit him furiously at the nape of the neck. By this he knew that she was the fox. Unable to stand the pain of it, He loosened his grasp when she jumped to the ground, made her escape, and was seen no more. What a pity that no one came to Kwai's rescue, and so made sure of the beast. The old family seat of Prince Ha-yun was in the county of Kumchon. He was a famous minister of state, and often came to rest at his summer house there. It was a large and prosperous household. After his death, his children lived there for many years. The people of that county told a strange story about Ha and his prosperity. He had placed in an upper room a large crock used to hold flour. One day, one of the servants, wishing to get some flour from the jar, lifted the lid. Suddenly, from the depths of it, a huge snake appeared. The servant was startled and fell back. Then he went and told the master what had happened. The master sent his servants and had the jar brought down. They broke it open and let out a huge, awful-looking snake, unlike anything anyone had seen before. Several of the servants joined in with clubs and killed the brute. They piled wood upon it. Then they set fire to the hole. Vile fumes arose and filled the house. The fumes spread through the house. Everyone who lived there died. No one of the family was left alive. Others who entered the house died as well. The place became cursed and was left in desolation. Soon after, a mysterious fire broke out and burned the remaining buildings, leaving only the vacant site. To this day, the place is known as haunted, and no one ventures to build there. There was a Confucian scholar once who lived in the southern part of Seoul. One day he went out for a walk, while his wife remained alone at home. When he was absent, an old woman came by, begging. She looked like a Buddhist priestess, for though very old, her face was not wrinkled. The scholar's wife asked her if she knew how to sew. She said she did, and so the wife said to her, "If you will stay and work for me, I'll give you your breakfast and your supper, and you'll not have to beg anywhere. Will you agree?" She replied, "Oh, thank you so much. I'll be delighted." Pleased with the arrangement, the scholar's wife took her in and set her to picking cotton and making and spinning thread. In one day she did more than 8 ordinary women, and yet, seemingly, had plenty of time to spare. The wife was simply delighted and treated her to a great feast. After 5 or 6 days, however, the wife's generosity cooled. The old woman grew angry. She said, "I am tired of living alone, and so I want your husband for my partner." The wife refused. The old woman went off in a rage, but returned soon after, accompanied by a decrepit old man who looked like a Buddhist beggar. These two came boldly into the room and took possession. They cleared out the old tablet box on the wall shelf, where the ancestral tablets were kept, and both disappeared into it, so that they were not seen at all, but only their voices heard. On whatever whim took them, they now demanded food and whatever else they wanted. When the scholar's wife failed to please them in the smallest thing, they sent plague and sickness after her, so that her children fell sick and died. Relatives came to see, but they also caught the plague, fell ill and died. Little by little, no one dared come near the place. It became known at last that the wife was held prisoner by these 2 goblin creatures. For a time, the townspeople saw smoke coming out of the chimney daily, and knew that the wife still lived. But after 5 or 6 days, the smoke ceased, and they knew then that the woman's end had come. No one dared even to ask. In olden times, in one of the counties of North Hamgyong province, there was a goblin that had killed many people. It gave off a foul, stinking smell. Successive magistrates were sent there, but in 10 days or so after arriving, each one died in great agony. No one wished to take the post. 100 or more were asked, and they all refused. At last, one brave soldier, with no connections and no influence, accepted. He was strong and fearless. He thought, even though there is a devil there, surely not all men will die. I shall face him myself. He said goodbye and took up his post. He found himself alone in the magistrate's residence. Everyone else had fled. He kept a long knife at his belt, for from the very first day he had noticed a fishy, stinking odor that grew stronger day by day. After 5 or 6 days he noticed something else. A mist would frequently drift in through the outer gate, and from this mist came the smell. Day by day it grew worse, until he could barely stand it. When the fatal day arrived, the runners and servants who had only just returned fled again. The magistrate kept a jar of whiskey by his side and drank from it often to steady his nerves. On that day he drank until he was very drunk and waited. At last he saw something coming through the main gateway. It was wrapped in fog, as wide as 3 men standing together, and 15 feet high. It had no head, no body, no arms. Only on the top were 2 dreadful eyes rolling wildly. The magistrate jumped up. He rushed toward it, gave a great shout, and struck it with his sword. When the blow landed, there was a sound like thunder, and the whole thing vanished. The foul smell disappeared with it at once. The magistrate, drunk, fell face down to the ground. The servants, thinking him dead, gathered in the courtyard to prepare for his burial. They noticed that the bodies of the others who had died from this evil had all been found on the veranda, but his was in the lower court. They lifted him up to prepare him for burial, when suddenly he came back to life, looked at them in anger, and asked what they meant. They stood frozen with fear. From that time on, there was no more smell. A certain Prince Han of Chungcheong province had a distant relative who was an uncouth countryman living in extreme poverty. This relative came to visit him from time to time. Han pitied his cold and hungry condition, gave him clothes to wear, and shared his food, urging him to stay and to prolong his visit often into several months. He felt sorry for him, but disliked his uncouthness and stupidity. On one of these visits, the poor relation suddenly announced his intention to return home, although the New Year's season was just at hand. Han urged him to remain, saying, "It would be better for you to be comfortably housed at my home, eating cake and soup and enjoying quiet sleep, rather than riding through wind and weather at this season of the year." At first he said he would have to go, but his host urged him so insistently to stay that at last he gave consent. On New Year's Eve he said to Prince Han, "I possess a strange kind of magic, by which I have under my control all manner of evil spirits, and New Year is the season at which I call them up, run over their names and inspect them. If I did not do so, I should lose control altogether, and there would follow no end of trouble among mortals. It is a matter of no small importance, and that is why I wish to go. Since, however, you have detained me, I shall have to call them up, in your Excellency's house, and look them over. I hope you will not object." Han was greatly astonished, but gave his consent. The poor relation went on to say, "This is an extremely important matter, and I would like to have for it your main hall." Han consented to this also, So that night they washed the floors and scoured them clean. The relation sat facing the south with great dignity, while Prince Han positioned himself outside to watch. Soon he saw a startling variety of demons pouring through the door, horrible in appearance and terrifying to behold. They lined up one after another, and still another, and another, till they filled the entire court, each bowing as he came before the master. At this point the man drew out a book, opened it before him, and began calling off the names. Demon guards, standing by the threshold, repeated the call and checked off the names, just as they do at the magistrate's office. From midnight until dawn it went on. Han said, "It was indeed no lie when he told me 10,000 devils." One latecomer arrived, after the marking was over, and still another came climbing over the wall. The man ordered them to be arrested and questioned under the paddle. The late arrival said, "I really have had a hard time of it lately, trying to survive, and so, in order to find anything at all, was obliged to inject smallpox into the home of a scholar who lives in Yong-Nam. It is a long way off, and so I have arrived too late for the roll call. A serious fault indeed, I confess." The one who climbed the wall said, "I too have known want and hunger, and so had to insert a little typhus into the family of a gentleman who lives in Kyongkui. But hearing that roll call was due, I came helter-skelter, fearing lest I should arrive too late, and so climbed the wall, which was indeed a sin." The man then, in a loud voice, scolded them harshly, saying, "These spirits have disobeyed my orders, caused disease, and sinned grievously. Worse than everything, they have climbed the wall of a high official's house." He ordered 100 blows to be given with the paddle. He ordered them to wear the wooden collar and to be locked fast in prison. Then, calling the others to him, he said, "Do not spread disease. Do you understand?" 3 times he ordered it, and 5 times he repeated it. Then they were all dismissed. The crowd of devils lined off before him, taking their departure and crushing out through the gate with no end of noise and confusion. After a long time they had all disappeared. Prince Han, looking on during this time, saw the man now seated alone in the hall. It was quiet, and all had vanished. The roosters crowed, and morning came. Han was greatly astonished, and asked how such a thing was possible. The poor relation said in reply, "When I was young, I studied in a monastery in the mountains. In that monastery was an old priest who had a most peculiar face. He seemed feeble and close to death. All the priests mocked him and treated him with contempt. I alone had pity on his age, and often gave him of my food, and always treated him kindly. One evening, when the moon was bright, the old priest said to me, 'There is a cave behind this monastery from which a beautiful view may be had. Will you not come with me and share it?' I went with him, and when we crossed the ridge of the hills into the stillness of the night, he drew a book from inside his robe and gave it to me, saying, 'I, who am old and ready to die, have here a great secret, which I have long wished to pass on to someone worthy. I have traveled over the wide length of Korea, and until now I have met no one worthy. But now I meet you, and my heart is satisfied. Please receive it.' I opened the book and found it a catalogue of evil spirits, with magic writing interspersed, and an explanation of the laws that govern the spirit world. The old priest wrote out a spell, and having set fire to it, countless spirits at once assembled, at which I was greatly alarmed. He then sat with me and called over the names one after the other, and said to the spirits, I am an old man now. I'm going away, and so I'm about to put you under the care of this young man. Obey him, and all will be well. I already had the book, and so called them to me, read out the new orders, and dismissed them. The old priest and I returned to the temple and went to sleep. I awoke early next morning and went to call on him, but he was gone. Thus I came into possession of the magic art, and have possessed it for 20 years and more. I have shown your excellency something the world knows nothing about. Han was astonished and asked, "May I not also come into possession of this wonderful gift?" The man replied, "Your excellency has great ability and can do wonderful things. But the possessor of this craft must be one poor and despised, and of no standing. For you, a minister, it would never do." The next day he left suddenly, and returned no more. Han sent a servant with a message to him. With great difficulty, the servant finally found him. Alone among 1,000 mountain peaks, living in a little straw hut no bigger than a cockle shell. There were no neighbors there, and no one else at all. He called him, but he refused to come. Han sent another messenger to invite him, but he had moved away, and no trace of him was left. There once lived a man in Seoul called Yi Chang, who often told the following story as his own experience. He was poor and had no home of his own, so he lived in rooms borrowed from others. When he had no other option, he would move into haunted houses and stay there. Once, after failing to find a place, he heard of a house in Inktown, one of the wards of Seoul, at the foot of South Mountain. It had been haunted for generations, and was now standing empty. Chang looked into it, and decided to move in. First, to find out whether the house was truly haunted, he called his 2 elder brothers, along with 5 or 6 relatives, and had them help clean the place out and spend the night there. The house had one upper room that was tightly locked. Looking through a crack in the wall, they could see inside a ceremonial chair and a stand for it. Also an old harp without any strings, a pair of worn shoes, and some sticks and bits of wood. Nothing else. Dust lay thick, as if it had not been disturbed for years. The group drank wine, sat round the table, played games, and stayed up through the night. When it was late, towards midnight, they suddenly heard the sound of harps and a great many voices, though the words were mixed and impossible to make out. It sounded as if many people were gathered at a feast, drinking and celebrating. The group discussed what to do. One man drew a sword and struck a hole through the partition that faced the locked room. Instantly from the other side, a sharp blade was thrust out towards them. The blade was blue. In fear and alarm they left it alone. But the sound of the harp and the noise continued until morning. At daylight the group left, and never went back. In the south ward there was another haunted house, which Chang also wanted. So he called his brothers and friends once more, to find out whether it was truly haunted. When they went in, they found 2 dogs inside the yard, one black and one tan, lying on the open veranda, one at each end. Their eyes were fiery red. Though the group shouted at them, they did not move. They neither barked nor bit. But when midnight came, the 2 animals got up, went down into the yard, and began howling at the dark sky. They jumped back and forth. Then, from around the corner of the house, there came a figure, dressed in ceremonial robes. The 2 dogs ran to meet him, jumping up before and behind, delighted to see him. He climbed to the veranda and sat down. Immediately 5 or 6 demons of many colors appeared and bowed before him. The man led the demons and the dogs around the house 2 or 3 times. They rushed up onto the veranda and jumped back down into the yard. Back and forth they went, until at last all of them disappeared. The demons went into a hole beneath the floor. The dogs returned to the veranda and lay down. The group had watched all of this from the inner room. When daylight came, they examined the place. Looking through the gaps in the floor, they saw only an old worn sieve and a few discarded brooms. Behind the house, they found another old broom stuffed into the chimney. They had a servant gather them up and burn them. The dogs lay where they were, all day long, and neither ate nor moved. Some of the group wanted to kill them, but were afraid, so frightening did they look. That night they stayed again, wanting to see if the same things would happen. They did. At midnight, the dogs went down into the yard and began howling at the sky. The figure in ceremonial robes came again. The demons came again, just as before. The group left the following morning in fear and disgust, and did not try again. A friend, hearing this from Chang, went and asked his 2 elder brothers, and they confirmed the story. Another story tells of a man, with nowhere to live, who moved into a haunted house in Inktown, said to be the same house with the locked room and the strange sounds. He opened the door, broke out the window, and removed the old harp, the ceremonial chair, the shoes and the sticks, and had them burned. Before the fire had finished its work, one of the servants collapsed and died. The man, seeing this, put out the fire in fright, returned everything to its place, and left. There was yet another man, with nowhere to live. He tried the same house. In the night, a woman in a blue skirt came down from the loft and behaved strangely. The man gathered his belongings and left. And again, in South Kettletown, a group of woodmen, passing behind the haunted house one early morning, found an old woman sitting under a tree, weeping. Thinking her an evil spirit, one man came up behind her and struck her with his sickle. The witch rushed off into the house. Only then did they realize she was barely knee-high. Hong Nai-pong was a military graduate, born in the year 1561, in the city of Pyongyang. He passed his examinations in 1603, and in 1637 attained the 3rd degree. By 1643 he was 82 years old. His son petitioned the king, asking that his father be given rank befitting his age. At that time a certain Han Hong-kil was chief of the royal secretaries, and he refused to pass the request to His Majesty. But in 1644, when the Crown Prince was returning from his exile in China, he came by way of Pyongyang. Hong's son used this opportunity to present the same request to the Crown Prince. His Highness received it and brought it to the notice of the king. Hong received the rank of 2nd degree. On receiving it, he said, "This year I shall die." And a little later, he died. Many years earlier, in the year 1594, Hong fell ill with typhus fever. After 10 days of suffering, he died. His body was prepared for burial and placed in a coffin. The friends and relatives left, and his wife stayed alone to watch over him. Suddenly, the body moved and fell with a thud to the ground. The woman, frightened, fainted away, and the other members of the family came rushing to her help. From that moment, the body came back to life, and Hong lived. He said, "In my dream I went to a terrifying place, where many people stood around me, and awful ogres, some wearing the heads of bulls, and some with the faces of wild beasts, rushed at me from every direction. A scribe dressed in black sat on a raised platform and spoke to me, saying, "There are 3 religions on earth: Confucianism, Buddhism, and Taoism. According to Buddhism, you know that heaven and hell are places that decide between a man's good deeds and his evil ones. You have been a blasphemer of the Buddha and a denier of a future life, acting as if you knew everything, boasting and arguing. You are now to be sent to hell, and you will not leave for countless ages." Then 2 or 3 constables carrying spears came and took hold of me. I screamed, "You are wrong. I am wrongly condemned." Just at that moment, a golden-faced Buddha came smiling toward me and said, "There is truly a mistake somewhere. This man must attain the 2nd degree and reach the age of 83 before he dies. How is it that you have come here? The order was that a certain Hong of Cheonju be arrested and brought, not you. But now that you have come, look around before you go, and tell others what you have seen." The guards took hold of me and brought me first to a prison house, where a sign was posted bearing the words, "Stirrers up of strife." I saw in this prison a great pit shaped like a brazier, built of stones and filled with fire. Flames arose, and forked tongues of flame. The stirrers up of strife were taken and made to sit close before it. I then saw one of the guards take a long rod of iron, heat it red hot, and burn out the eyes of the guilty ones. I saw also that they were hung up like dried fish. The guides who accompanied me said, while these were on earth, they did not care for other people, but looked at others as enemies. They mocked the laws of heaven and sought only selfish gain, and so they are punished. The next hell was marked, Liars. In that hell I saw an iron pillar, many feet tall, and great stones placed before it. The offenders were called up and made to kneel before the pillar. Then I saw an executioner take a knife and drive a hole through the tongues of the offenders. He passed an iron chain through each one and hung them from the pillar, so that they dangled by their tongues several feet from the ground. A stone was then tied to each one's feet, with the stones pulling downward and the chains fixed to the pillar. Their tongues were pulled out a foot or more, and their eyes rolled in their sockets. Their suffering was terrible. The guide said, "These offenders, when on earth, used their tongues to tell lies and to separate friend from friend, and so they are punished." The next hell was marked, Deceivers. I saw in it crowds of people. They were ogres that cut the flesh from their bodies and fed it to starving demons. These ate and ate, and the flesh was cut and cut, until only the bones remained. When the winds of hell blew, flesh returned to them. Then metal snakes and copper dogs crowded in to bite them and suck their blood. Their screams made the earth tremble. The guide said to me, when these offenders were on earth, they held high office, and while they pretended to be true and good, they received bribes in secret and were doers of all evil. As ministers of state, they ate the fat of the land and sucked the blood of the people. Yet they presented themselves as benefactors and were praised by all. While in reality they lived as thieves, they pretended to be holy, as Confucius and Mencius are holy. They were deceivers and robbers, and so are punished. The guides then said, "It is not necessary that you see all the hells." They said to one another, Let us take him over there and show him. Then they led me, some distance to the southeast. There was a great house, with a sign painted on it, the home of the blessed. As I looked, there were beautiful halos encircling it, and clouds of glory. There were hundreds of priests in robes. Some carried lotus flowers in full bloom. Some were seated like the Buddha. Some were reading prayers. The guide said, "These, when on earth, kept the faith, and with wholehearted devotion served the Buddha, and so have escaped the 8 sorrows and the 10 punishments, and are now in the home of the blessed, which is called heaven." When we had seen all these things, we returned. The golden-faced Buddha said to me, "Not many on earth believe in the Buddha, and few know of heaven and hell. What do you think of it?" I bowed low and thanked him. Then the black-coated scribe said, "I am sending this man away. See him safely off." The spirit soldiers took me with them, and while on the way, I awakened with a start and found that I had been dead for 4 days. A gentleman of Seoul was crossing the Han River in a boat. During the crossing, he nodded for a moment, fell asleep, and dreamed. In his dream, he met a man with heavy arching eyebrows and almond eyes, whose face was deep red, and who was of enormous stature. He was dressed in green, and had a long beard that came down to his belt. He was a man of majestic appearance, riding a red horse, with a great sword at his side. He asked the gentleman to open his hand. The gentleman did so, and the stranger marked it with the sign of the god of war. Then he said, "When you cross the river, do not go straight to Seoul. Wait at the landing. 7 horses will shortly appear, loaded with wicker hampers, heading for the capital. Call the horsemen over, open your hand, and show them the sign. When they see it, they will all take their own lives right there before you. After that, take the loads and pile them up, but do not look inside them. Then go at once to the palace and report the matter. Have everything burned. This is of the greatest importance. Follow my instructions exactly." The gentleman woke with a start. He looked at his hand, and there was the mark. Not only that, but the ink had not yet dried. Shaken, but trusting what he had seen, he waited on the riverbank. Before long, exactly as he had been told, 7 horses came into view, loaded with hampers, coming from the far south. There were attendants with them, and behind them walked a man in an official coat. When they had crossed the river, the gentleman called them over and said, "I have something to say to you. Come close." They came, unsuspecting, though they looked uneasy. He opened his hand and showed them the mark. The moment they saw it, the man in the official coat turned, leapt from the bank, and threw himself into the river. The 8 or 9 others rushed after him and did the same. The gentleman called the boatmen over and told them the hampers were dangerous. He said he would need to report to the palace, and that in the meantime they were to stand guard and not touch the loads or look inside them. He went as fast as he could and reported everything to the Board of War. The board sent an official, had the hampers brought into Seoul, piled them high with wood, and set them on fire. As the fire took hold, the baskets burst open. Out poured countless tiny figures of men and horses, each no more than an inch long. When the officials saw this, they were frozen with fear. Their hearts seemed to stop, and they were unable to speak. Before long, the hampers were completely burned, and the figures with them. These were the work of a magician, intended for a secret invasion of Seoul, prevented only because Kwan had warned them. From that time on, the people of Seoul made faithful offerings to the god of war. They believed he had saved the city. In Yonnan County, Wanghai Province, there was a literary graduate whose name has been forgotten. He fell ill one day and remained in his room, leaning helplessly against the wall. Suddenly, several spirit soldiers appeared to him, saying, "The governor of the lower hell has ordered your arrest." They bound him with a chain about his neck and led him away. They journeyed for many hundreds of miles, and at last reached a place with a very high wall. The spirits took him inside and went on for a long distance. Within the walls there stood a great structure, whose height reached to heaven. They arrived at the gate, and the spirits who held him led him inside. When they entered the inner courtyard, they forced him to the ground, face down. Glancing up, he saw what looked like a king seated on a throne. On either side of him stood attendant officers. There were also dozens of secretaries and soldiers going and coming on urgent errands. The king's appearance was terrible, and his presence filled the room with dread. The graduate broke out in a cold sweat and dared not look up. In a little while, a secretary stepped forward to relay the king's words, and the king asked, "Where do you come from? What is your name? How old are you? What do you do for a living? Tell me the truth, and no lies." The scholar, frightened to death, replied, "My clan name is so-and-so, and my given name is so-and-so. I am an old man, and my family has lived in Yonnan for generations. I am simple by nature, and have not done anything special. I have heard all my life that if you pray with a loving heart, you will escape hell, and so I have given my time to calling on the Buddha and giving to the poor." The secretary went at once and reported this to the king. After some time he came back with a message saying, "Come closer to the steps. You are not the one we were sent to bring. It happens that you share the same name and you have been wrongly arrested. You may go now." The scholar joined his hands and bowed deeply. Again the secretary brought a message from the king saying, "My house when I was on earth was in such a place, in such a ward of Seoul. When you go back, I want to send a message through you. I have been here a long time, and the outer coat I wear is worn to shreds. Ask my family to send me a new one. I shall be greatly obliged. Do not forget." The scholar said, "I will carry your message faithfully. But the ways of the living world and the dead are so different that when I deliver it, they may say I am talking nonsense. I will need some proof, or they will not believe me." The king replied, "Your words are true, very true. When I was on earth, one of my rank buttons, the button worn on the cap as a mark of rank, had a broken edge. I hid it in the 3rd volume of the Book of History. I alone know of it. No one else in the world. Give this as proof, and they will listen." The scholar replied, "That will be satisfactory. But what should I do once they have made the new coat?" The king answered, "Prepare a sacrifice. Offer the coat by fire, and it will reach me." The scholar said farewell, and the king sent 2 soldier guards with him. As they came out, the scholar asked the soldiers who the one seated on the throne was. "He is the king of Hades," they said. "His surname is Pak, and his given name is U." They arrived at the bank of a river, and the two soldiers pushed him into the water. He awoke with a start and found that he had been dead for 3 days. When he recovered from his illness, he traveled to Seoul and found the house. He asked about the family name and found it was indeed Pak-U. Pak-U had 2 sons who had graduated and were holding office. The scholar wanted to see them, but the gatekeeper would not let him in. He waited at the gate until sunset. Then an old servant came out from the inner quarters, and the scholar begged to see the master. The servant went back inside and reported it. A little later, the scholar was allowed in. On entering, he saw 2 men who appeared to be the heads of the household. They had him sit down and asked who he was and what he had to say. He replied, "I am a student living in Yonnan County, Wanghai Province. On such and such a day I died and went into the other world, where your father gave me a commission." The 2 listened for a moment, and then, without waiting to hear the rest, grew very angry and began to scold him, saying, "How dare such a scarecrow as you come into our house and say such things? This is nonsense that you talk. Throw him out." They shouted this to the servants. But the scholar called back, "I have proof. Listen. If it fails, then throw me out." One of the 2 said, "What proof could you possibly have?" Then the scholar carefully told them about the rank button. The 2, astonished, had the book of history brought down and examined it. And there, in the 3rd volume, was the button. Every detail was correct. It was a button they had missed after their father's death and had searched for in vain. Accepting the message as true, they began to mourn. The women of the family called the scholar in and asked him what he had seen. So they made the outer coat, chose a day, and offered it by fire before the ancestral altar. 3 days after the sacrifice, the scholar dreamed, and the family of Pak dreamed too, that the king of Hades had come and given each of them his thanks for the coat. They kept the scholar at their home, treated him with great respect, and became his close friends from that day on.